consciousness is this acupunctural point, and if we pinch on it in the right way, it can just heal, I would say, the problems we have in theoretical physics, cosmology, biology. So it is, I believe it is through the study of consciousness that we will learn not only about consciousness itself, which is good enough, but about the rest of the sciences. Okay, so I'm working with a blind man who can perceive images in the near surroundings. So this would be like a cousin of what's called remote viewing.
Thank you.
It's impossible for most of my colleagues, and for me a few years ago, it was simply impossible. It was nonsense. It was bullshit. It was what the you see, it's because what it says is we can apprehend, we can perceive stuff that's beyond our skulls without the 5 sanctioned little windows, which are our 5 senses. When my blind friend perceives these images, he's not only telling me about how they look, he tells me about how they smell, how they sound, how they feel. He is not just hacking photons that are not reaching his retina. It's even more interesting than that. He's accessing a kind of a gestalt of perception, and he can do it because he can go up there before this has turned out into what neurophysiology normally shows. I think people can perceive things at a level where it's like the water at the top of the mountain, where everything is connected, and then the rivers go down the mountain and they become specified into senses, perhaps. It's like mind through matter can express itself. Imagine that you had the elbow joint frozen, so you could only move like that, right? And also the wrist. So the kind of the freedom of movement, the freedom of thought would be very limited. So I think we have all these frozen joints intellectually. I call this the unholy trinity, right? Materialism, mechanicism, and reductionism. But I suspect that the science will be transformed. What we call the scientific method will need to evolve into something different if we really want to study these phenomena.
Welcome to Essential Foundation channel. Today we will have a conversation with Dr. Alex Gomez Marin about how can science study consciousness? Why can't we remember the future? And why is death the biggest elephant in the room? Hello, Alex. And thank you very much for finding the time for this interview. And just to introduce you, you are a theoretical physicist by training. You have a PhD in this field. You are a neuroscientist by chance or by choice. You can tell more about it. Because you're also the head of the Behavior of Organisms laboratory in the Institute of Neuroscience in Alicante in Spain. You're associate professor. But you're also a philosopher at heart and parapsychologist by necessity, correct?
Yes, I wear all these masks. Thank you, Natalia, for the invitation. I'm honored to talk to you. And let me just say up front, it's a blessing, the work you're doing at Essential Foundation. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Currently, your research focuses on the scientific study of consciousness in the real world. And the first question I want to ask you is, why should science be concerned with consciousness at all? Either as part of theoretical framework, like extending physics to include consciousness, or as a research topic on its own right. Why not let it be? We lived like that for a couple hundred years, worked well for us, right?
Yes, we've let it be for 400 years since science as we know it started. Well, why consciousness matters? Well, first of all, because people care about it. And we could get into the definition business, but anyways, experience, interiority, that's the first-hand material of everyone since they get up in the morning. And so it's a topic of general interest. I mean, it's kind of the thing that people care the most, is what they feel, why they feel what they feel. It's about life, it's about experience, it's about death. So that would be my first answer. It's just of general interest. The second one, maybe it's more related to what consciousness can do for science, as opposed to what science can do for consciousness. And I like to dance like this, because science was founded with a very strategic decision of letting to the side, putting to the side, postponing quality, postponing pain, sense, and so on. And it was a good business. It worked really well for quite a few centuries. But there was always this main work to be addressed, which is, well, now that we've built an understanding of the world from the bottom up, first physics, then chemistry, biology, psychology. Well, 400 years later, after Galileo wrote Il Saggiatore, now we just reached, I would say, the limits of what this physicalist worldview can offer. And so it is another opportunity to really address what science, in a way, consciously forgot, and then it forgot that it had forgotten it. So that would be the second reason. And the third one would be, and perhaps this comes up in our conversation later, that consciousness is this deluxe acupunctural point. And if we pinch on it in the right way, it can just heal, I would say, the problems we have in theoretical physics, cosmology, biology. So it is, I believe it is through the study of consciousness that we will learn not only about consciousness itself, which is good enough, but about the rest of the sciences. In a way, everything is connected, perhaps behind the scenes. So these are three really good reasons why we should care about consciousness.
And how can we study consciousness? What is your research all about? The practical aspects, how it looks like, what research questions you want to answer, stuff like that.
Yes, it is hard. It is difficult because we scientists, and I could speak also wearing my philosopher's hat, if that's allowed, or just my experiencer's hat as things that have happened to me. But we scientists, or as a physicist, I've been trained, I hope very well, like a sword, to be able to cut certain problems in certain ways, the way we approach. And this means that when it comes the time to face consciousness, well, I feel that what we've been taught, it doesn't really work. We've been taught to be objective. We've been taught to be sterile. We've been taught to be distant. We've been taught to be quantitative. And so it is, from my experience, it's fascinating, but it's really hard to be a scientist of consciousness because of what I was just saying a few minutes ago. It's not just my ontogeny, my development as a scientist, my training is like the whole phylogeny, the whole history of science is at least the mainstream, the orthodox way. It's built around the opposite, I would say, or the complementary attitude that has to do with not putting experience at the center. Now, having said this, it is possible to study consciousness. People are doing it today. As some of your, I suppose all of your viewers know, the field was sanctioned, like with the Pope of the time, which is a Nobel laureate, right? Crick said, we can now do it. And people have been doing it for decades, by the way. We can talk about that too. The untold, the secret story of a science of consciousness in the 20th century. But anyways, we've been doing it. They've been doing it for 30 years now, at least. There are journals, there is funding. These are all socio-political aspects that are very important as well, right? So it's like there's a whole machinery where this can be done. And so there are theories, there are many theories. Most of them are so boring to me, but anyways, they need to be there. Yes, because most of them just start from where they are allowed to start, which is from the brain. It's like, well, the brain is this magic bottle, and somehow, somewhere, consciousness will emerge. But anyways, people are doing it theoretically and also empirically. And neuroscience is a powerful enterprise. So you can put people in scanners, and you can watch their brain and you can interfere, and you can manipulate. You have all these tools available. Now, there are even more interesting things going on. So that if that wasn't enough, that's pretty good already. Like, people can do it. It is a profession. You can be a scientist. It's not taboo. You're not punished. But then there are other more important things and more interesting, for which, well, the traffic light is orange, right? Now, the traffic light is green for consciousness writ large, and that's why we see all these popular books and so on. The traffic light is orange for other metaphysical systems, right? So physicalism, I think it's dying. I call it the terminal lucidity moments of physicalism. And there are other players in the room now, at least they're in the room, all these other isms, right? Idealism, of course, but also panpsychism. And I would better like to hear a pan-experientialism, dual aspect monism. There are many isms so that's interesting. Plus, there are these edge phenomena. I call them the edges of consciousness. Not just the theory, but this really weird shit that happens and that can be studied scientifically, that just takes the study of consciousness to a whole new level, because it's not anymore about like this artificial laboratory setting where a person is sitting down and he or she is asked to report on their perception as we're recording, which is pretty good, right? It's the usual neuroscience business. No. Things that really challenge our understanding of the cosmos. Things, data, evidence, not proof, but evidence that makes us question our basic, like the basic premises we hardly revise, like what's space, what's time, what about causality, what about the extended mind, how extended is it? Is it literally extended, or is it just a metaphor? Or what about the models we have? So it is a mess. Let me say one more thing, Natalia, and I speak a lot, so just take me back to wherever you want me to go. Neuroscience today, I feel it's in this adolescent state. There are all these tribes. Some have long hair, others have tattoos, right? And then they fight amongst themselves. But I feel we're starting to reach adulthood. Like, we can be more calm, we can be different in the room, and we can talk about serious stuff. I'm watching this transition happening now. And again, it's in part because of work like what you are all doing at the Ascension Foundation, that we can address consciousness for real, which was, by the way, the event we run at the Paris Center last week. It was called Consciousness for Real. So not just the scientific study of consciousness, and being very neutral and polite and conservative, but the real thing, it is happening.
Can you give us an example from your particular research? What are you doing to study consciousness?
Yes.
How you do it?
Yes.
What results have you achieved? What questions have you answered?
All right. Okay. I always explain things with a stool, because 3 is a pretty special number, and it works. So it's theory. We can talk more about that, because I read a lot and I think a lot about these things. But then there's empirical work, and then more societal work. But now you're asking me, give me an example, because yes, I try to fly like a kite, like a kite. Bring me down. Okay, so I'm working with a blind man who can perceive images in the near surroundings. So this would be like a cousin of what's called remote viewing, this alleged ability. And you always need to say alleged, because people say, no, it's not true, it's not proven. Well, there's a lot of evidence and very strong protocols as to how to do that. But so I'm studying a version of that can be called extra-ocular vision. Other people call it mind sight. Other people call it direct vision, intuitive vision. A Frenchman 100 years ago, Jules Romain, wrote a book. He called it the paroptic sense. Whatever it is the ability to perceive visual information without your eyes. So it's very concrete. Go in a room, you sit with people who allegedly can do it, and then you ask them to describe objects or describe images, and then you need to crank up the controls, meaning you need to be very careful not to convey subliminal information. Of course, be very sure that they cannot see them, so they use blindfolds, but because that's often not enough, and there are many problems with that, I won't get into the details unless you ask me, but well, that's why I'm working with a blind man, so it's triple blind condition, and he allows me to joke like this, I don't know what the images are, and he doesn't know, and he can't see them, and he's blindfolded, and he's blind. And we put them in envelopes, you shuffle them, so you randomize them. There's a whole protocol. And then he's asked to draw them or describe them. And then there's scientific ways to evaluate the likelihood or the correctness or the chances that such guesses are just chance or not. And so this is something very concrete I'm doing. And it's mind-blowing. I've also seen it in kids. This is something that's taught in kids here in Spain. I discovered this studying the work of Jacobo Grinberg, a Mexican neurophysiologist who disappeared 30 years ago. And I was studying his theory of consciousness, the synergic theory. And he also had this kind of legs to his investigations, crazy shit again. And one of them was extra-ocular vision. So for me, this falls into the main leg of what's called ESP, extrasensory perception, which it's impossible for most of my colleagues. And for me, a few years ago, it was simply impossible. It was nonsense. It was bullshit. It was you see, it's because what it says is we can apprehend, we can perceive stuff that's beyond our skulls without the 5 sanctioned little windows, which are our 5 senses. So maybe there's another channel. That's where the theory comes in. What about the information? Is it related to entanglement? We don't know. But the fact is, and that's another thing I love, you don't need a large hadron collider that costs billions. You need this and this, and of course some controls, and people, athletes, psychical athletes who can do it. And it's fascinating, Natalia. When I come back home, and I've seen that, I'm split. A part of me feels that has witnessed a scientific miracle, and that's an oxymoron, but anyways, and another part just insults me. A part of me insults me and says, you're stupid, like you're wasting your time, you're burning the reputation if you had that. But it's happening in front of my eyes. And of course, there can be sensory leaking, and sometimes it could be chance, but I've seen things as an experimenter that I cannot explain with the usual frames. And I love that because I'm a rebel, but I'm a rebel with a cause. I'm not a rebel without a cause. I think these are precisely the openings in the wall that could lead us to a new paradigm, which is a word I don't like using very much because it's a bit worn out. So this is an example, and maybe I can tell you something more about it, more concrete. Last time I worked with my blind friend, I said, all right, what we're doing seems to be non-local perception in space, right? Because right here, right now, somewhere, there's some information, and I'm asking you to access it, and you seem to be doing it pretty well. But then I have this friend who worked many years with the team in the United States that was working on remote viewing related to the Stargate project and so on. And he told me, Alex, the ultimate control is to use time. And this meant ask the person to describe the image before you choose it. Which means if they can do it, there's no way that, they just peep through their blindfolds, or he had an implant and somebody was looking in the room. Like all accusations of cheating or improper controls, they just go to the waste. And so we did it. I said, look, we'll do that. You paint, You draw, you say what you perceive, and when you're finished, you let me know. We draw a true random number. We pick an image from this pool of 30 images, and we see how it looks like. Wow, we did 6 of them. They were spot on, you know? So that has been the most shocking experience I've had as a scientist, to witness that and say, well, if what my eyes just saw is real, then we need to rethink causality, which is so sacred to a physicist, amongst other things, because this is non-locality, you could say, in time. So that's where I am, navigating these really strange waters.
Interesting. What was the most kind of revealing or aha moment for you in your entire research? What was most surprising for you?
Well,
that it did happen.
Well,
or
there have been many drops. Like, it's raining quite a lot recently of all this. And this is one of the highlights, what I just explained to you. Like, just, you see, because I'm a theoretician by training, and I can entertain things in my mind. I can entertain them. I enjoy them. I believe them. But one thing is to have them up here, and another thing is to actually do it, right? That's where the theoretical work needs to be well married with the empirical work. So doesn't freak me out. I can think about those things, but I went and do it. I went and tried it out myself, right? So it was a hybrid of an experience and an experiment. And this hints to a new kind of science, maybe we can talk about, because I was saying we're taught to be so distant, so objective, right? As normal. I mean, that's what education is about, if you want to become a scientist. But this is profoundly moving emotionally, and also I would say spiritually and intellectually, right? So just being there and seeing that happen in front of me, it's been one of the highlights empirically. Then theoretically, there are others, like when I read certain books, I can have these moments too, these kind of droplets of insight. And there's so many great books currently published, and also this archaeology of concepts that needs to be done. A highlight would be the work of Henry Bergson, whom I absolutely adore, the French philosopher. When I read Bergson, I'm carried away to some other space. I think with words, he won a Nobel Prize for literature. I think his words carry you into this intuitive state of mind. And Bergson wrote, I mean, it's not just that it makes you feel good, or it makes you, it tricks yourself into that believing you get it. He has books like Matter and Memory, which is more than 125 years old, which is absolutely, like, if you bring it to neuroscience today, it's just pioneering more than a century after that. So reading Bergson also does that to me on the theoretical side. And maybe to complete the 3, right? So I told you about an experiment. I tell you about Bergson and his philosophy. And then another thing that really brings so much light is having these gatherings, either virtually or in person, when we do events at the Paris Center, when I'm invited to this new community I didn't know existed. Look, I stopped going to conferences. I stopped going, not because of COVID. Before, they were so boring. It's like the same mantras everywhere. And I stopped going. And then I discovered like this community that now, like mushrooms after the rain, they're just growing, and you can see them. Now you can see them everywhere. It's like amazing. And just being there and feeling that we're not doing that alone, despite of your ism, doesn't matter if you're more of an idealist than I could say even a physicalist, you know. there is something beautiful going on. We are trying to do something that can change not the world, but can change ourselves, can change. It feels like a mystical experience done through reason and experimentation.
Fascinating. Do you think, I'm just curious, do you think it's perhaps a skill that each of us can develop? Because if we train something like that from the early times, maybe we all can do that.
Yes. Yes and no. I have 2 daughters. I have 2 daughters. And again, one thing is to know it, another thing is to see it. like when I taught them how to swim, I couldn't believe that they could do it. So one day they just can't swim, right? So you're doing, they would miserably drown. One day they can't swim. It's a miracle, right? And I'm using the word miracle too often. I shouldn't be doing that. Okay, it's remarkable. And then I realized, well, if I hadn't taught them or nobody had taught them, maybe they would never swim. Maybe they would die not knowing what it is like to swim, right? With walking is different, right? They would eventually walk. What I'm saying is all these abilities are latent. I think this is a very important word. They are latent. But to make them patent, to make them express themselves, and also reminds me of this new order that physics brings through quantum physics, right? Like there's the actual and then there's the virtual. Well, this transition from the virtual to the actual takes work. And so all these, I believe we as humans have those capacities, but of course, not everybody can run 100 meters in less than 10 seconds. And this is why I'm speaking up loud. This is why I've come out of the closet, amongst other reasons, to just ask people, come and work with us, because this new science is not about sampling from your undergrad students and just play the statistics games. You need people who have made those latent abilities patent. Now then, there are other businesses, because then you can see if we learn how it works, you could also help facilitate those abilities being more expressed. And the other way around, I learn a lot from trainers who perhaps don't care about scientifically demonstrating these phenomena, but they know how to elicit them. So you see, here's another nice transaction, another nice interchange between the scientist and a coach or society writ large.
Do you have a hypothesis for yourself? How is it possible that a blind man can do these things, can see without having sight?
Yeah, I think I'll maybe use metaphor here, of course. Part of the work is to articulate that insight or guess into something as concrete as possible, mathematically, maybe. But I think we've confused. Imagine that you had the elbow joint frozen, so you could only move like that, right? And also the wrist. So the kind of the freedom of movement, the freedom of thought would be very limited. So I think we have all these frozen joints intellectually, right? Let me give you another one and then hopefully hint an answer to your question as to how is it happening. We've confused science with materialism. That's a big one, right? It's like it's a package. It's a 2-for-1. It's like, well, I don't want 2-for-1. I just want science. We've confused science, materialism with secularism or even atheism, right? Another package. It's like a 3-for-1 or 4-for-1. If you want to be a scientist, you must be a materialist, and you also must be a secular humanist, and if possible, an atheist, you know? Okay, we've confused also science with physicalism or materialism and mechanicism. So the mechanical, I call this the unholy trinity, right? Materialism, mechanicism, and reductionism. These are all quite evil isms. We need to find those devils a place to play. So if you pull those strings and start doing some kind of movement exercises, you realize that the mechanical view of nature doesn't allow any exchange or interchange unless it's mediated by some sort of direct contact push. It's like the billiard ball way of thinking about everything, life, the universe, and everything. It's like, well, and by the way, it has to do a lot with the team. It does with materialism, because if everything is matter, and what's matter, you know, like, well, matter is this idea that there's a substance that is in a way self-sufficient, that it doesn't care about other pieces of matter. So it is externally related. It is also everything we are not, right? So we are purposeful, we are aware, we have value. So matter is the negation of all of that. Matter is the ultimate negation of all we care about. And because, now, but let me just zoom in into this aspect, because it is externally related, like this piece of matter couldn't care less about this piece of matter unless this one sends it a message, and this message is the business of forces and particles in physics, right? So we've been told, but this is a philosophical system. This is not so much what science shows. This is just an interpretation of the world. So if that's the case, and I don't think it is, but if that's the case, the only way this guy can know about what's going on with this guy is if some messenger arrives and hits it. You know, it's like science is kind of the science of contact in a way. Now, if we could get rid of that assumption and rethink the relationship between the stuff that the universe is made of, and this is quite possible. I mean, again, the quantum physicists have thought about that, but the idealists have thought about that. The pan-experientialists, a la Whitehead, Alfred North Whitehead, have conceived a universe in which, for instance, for Whitehead, and this is a really difficult philosopher, but the world is made of events, actual occasions, he calls it, right? Not of matter. And so then you allow different modes of relationship. And these modes allow these events, or however you want to call it, to prehend each other. They're always somehow connected. So you don't need to bring in the connections later, post hoc and artificially on top of what's already going on. It's built in the operating system, right? So I'm telling you all of this because if you start thinking like that, then it is not impossible or extraordinary or weird that I can be perceiving an object without some sensory impact, right? And this also applies amongst or between minds. My mind would be naturally porous to yours. I could be somehow, and the somehow is kind of the detail that we need to work on, be perceiving what you're thinking. Because to begin with, we are all, and I could use the word entangled, but I don't need to. We're all intrinsically related. Our minds are that. And there's maybe some limit cases in which they're not, but these are more the exception than the rule. So it's like flipping the paradigm upside down. And let me say one more thing. People freak out. No, Alex, if you do that, we need to throw to the bin the entire... No, bullshit. Look, when Einstein came along and brought general and special relativity, the apples of Isaac Newton, they continued to fall in the same way. It's like the world didn't stop. The world didn't stop. It was an expansion of our understanding. And now classical mechanics is a particular case within this larger framework, right? So even if all of what we're talking about here, this weird stuff, is real, and I think it's real, psychology as we know it remains, and the earth continues to spin. It's not a problem. It's a blessing, and which we shouldn't be afraid of this change, because what we know so far, we have a place in there, but it wouldn't be the whole story. The whole story is more fascinating, and the whole story, by the way, is what people feel. Like mothers, that they feel something wrong just happened to their kids, right? Or twin brothers or sisters or when you have a dream, and people would tell you endless stories. Now we dismiss them as anecdotes, but this is not supernatural. This is super normal. These things happen all the time. It's just that it's really hard to invite them to the laboratory and ask them to, it's like, please reveal yourself. Please show yourself. Well, it is difficult for many reasons that I won't get into these. But we can think about it and we can see it with our own eyes. So to your question, I think people can perceive things at a level, and I do that at a level where it's like the water at the top of the mountain, where everything is connected, and then the rivers go down the mountain and they become specified into senses, perhaps, and then we call this vision or we call this olfaction, and then they reach the bottom, and that's what we usually talk about. But you can just, like a salmon, swim up the river, and by the way, there you find synesthetic effects. So, for instance, when my blind friend perceives these images, he's not only telling me about how they look, he tells me about how they smell, how they sound, how they feel. So this gives you some hints that he is not just hacking photons that are not reaching his retina. It's even more interesting than that. He's accessing a kind of a gestalt of perception, and he can do it because he can go up there before this has turned out into what neurophysiology normally shows.
Yeah, I think I have a bit of a theory, which I also discussed with Dr. Federico Fagin. I don't know about you, but in my school, my physics ended at classical physics. I've never had quantum physics. And I think majority of people I don't know about the next generation, maybe it's different now, but that's where the cut comes. So it shapes our perception of reality. I think if I had quantum physics at school, and I knew that classical physics is just an exception to the rule, right? And not other way around, then some of these phenomena wouldn't look to me so anomalous as they do now, and then to the majority of people. So that's, I think that plays a role in some ways. And how does material science deal with these cases? They just ignore it, or they just say it's a nonsense, or what's your experience?
Yeah, my materialist friends, I love you all. We
all do.
Well, look, I realized my name, Alejandro, that's my name, Alex Alejandro. I checked the etymology the other day, and it means the man who repels the enemies. So I felt, wait, that explains a part of the deal. Because I like a little bit the grappling and so on. I'm learning to love them. I'm learning to love thy enemy. But look, and I'm rough. I know. Maybe it's because I'm Spanish. I'll use it as an excuse, because some people are more polite. Some people are more polished, more careful, more analytical. I'm not like that. I mean, they are boring and they are closed-minded and many other things. And what they do, it's very predictable. They say, first they would say, whatever, just anecdote. I mean, Alex, look, let's ground it in something that happened to me. I had a near-death experience. I saw the tunnel and all the rest. I come back and I tell it to my friends, my colleagues. They're mostly physicalists, of course. They don't know it, but that's another thing. They don't know. They have an ideology. They just don't know. They don't believe. They think they don't believe in anything. This is amazing. It's like, all right, very good. So they tolerate me. They tolerated me for a while. They say, wow, Alex, how amazing. I'm so glad you recovered and so on. So first they tolerate you. They entertain you. Like, poor guy. He's telling me all this, crazy shit. Then if you just insist and you say, no, but wait, this is telling something about the work we're doing. Because if we're studying the brain and its relationship with the mind, well, again, for them, it's a fixed joint because it's the same thing, but for me, it's not. If we're studying this relationship, what just happened to me and actually to many other people is like very interesting data to just maybe reassess, bring more things onto the table. And then they're like, yeah, whatever. So then they start dismissing it, right? So if you insist again, and sometimes you find these dogmatic skeptics, well, if you don't have a PhD, they'll talk to you, they talk down to you, right? They'll say, let me explain to you. Because, your irrational beliefs, you don't know statistics, but I do, poor guy. So it's like this really shitty paternalist attitude towards the experiences. I say that because it makes me angry. It's like people are having these incredible, life-transforming, weird experiences, and we, academics, often just dismiss them. They just say, well, whatever. Either you're mad, and we don't want to say that, or you're just stupid. Like, you know, and so that's another attitude. Now, if you even insist further, like Bernardo has done, or like my friend Rupert Sheldrake has done, and you meet them, then they'll put up all sort of bullshit argument, like saying, well, there's no real evidence for that. It's like, and then you say, well, have you read it? And they say, well, no. Why? Well, because it's impossible. So they themselves just betray that they present themselves as like the heralds of science, but they're not actually behaving as such, right? So then they would say, well, there's no evidence. And when you bring the evidence, they'll say, well, there's just anecdotal. And then when you bring 1,000 cases, they'll say, well, it's not done in a lab. And then when you bring evidence done in a lab, they'll say, well, what about the statistics? And then when you show the statistics are correct, they'll say, well, but what about it hasn't been replicated? And then when you show more studies where it has been replicated, they say, well, whatever, it must be a file drawer effect. And then when you do the calculations, do a meta-analysis, and you show it's not, they'll say, well, so there must be a problem. I love it. It's like this joke where you say, here's the data. And then the other person says, very nice, but does it work in theory? It's like, well, maybe the problem is your theory. So you see, Natalia, there are all these levels. And that's why I say it's the terminal lucidity of physicalism, because they've burned many of those defenses now. And we now can talk about psychedelics. We now can talk about near-death experiences. We can even now talk about UAPs. And so I feel they don't know what to do. Let me say another thing, and you feel free to cut whatever I say that's inappropriate. But also, we've been having funerals one at a time, if you know what I mean, from the famous quote. There've been all these horsemen protecting the faith of science from superstition and all of the rest. Well, these people are dying. These people are just not in our landscape anymore. So there's a sense of freedom where we can talk about these things. But what they will say, wrapping it up, for physicalists, this is impossible. This is literally impossible. And I make this exercise of compassion, of intellectual compassion. Like, can I feel like they feel? There's no way. I look, Natalia, I think, and this would take us somewhere else, but it's like the Umwelt idea, the affordance idea, like the ability to perceive. You know, when people say, if you don't know music, and they would say, look at these lines with dots. Can't you see the melody? And you'd be like, no, I just see random dots on lines. What is that? So I think they cannot believe it. And I think they cannot even perceive it. So I'm not sure what's the point in insisting, just trying to convert them. Let's just leave them alone and do our own business. But anyways, they're still annoying. That's by the way, why I enjoy writing book reviews of these lovely neuro celebrities, because they go there and they just tell to the public, hey, I'm Professor X. By the way, when you die, there's nothing else. Like, well, how do you know? You're projecting your physicalist ideology, not your science. So in a way, I also feel like Alejandro's comes here and says, well, I need to also fight against that. So, but anyway, it's just some kind of petty human dynamics, because if we get more serious here, the evolution of consciousness has its own arc. We're part of it. But it's like, it's going to happen anyways, one way or another. So this also makes me feel more relaxed about it. I mean, there's a lot at stake, but if it doesn't happen this century, it will happen the following century if we haven't destroyed the Earth, right? And if we destroy the Earth, well, it will happen in some other planet. Maybe it has already happened. So it's like, let's zoom out. Sorry for the monologue. Let's zoom out. It's like science. Well, science is this 400 years experiment in the West. But all cultures, all around the world, in all moments of time, except these last 400 years in the West, they've known all that, right? So we are the anomaly. Science is the anomaly correcting itself, which is one of its greatest virtues. That's what's going on.
I think in the case of NDE, and I think we might want to talk about it a little bit later, there is at least an explanation from the materialist science. They say it's a hallucination. Okay, we can argue whether a brain can hallucinate in a coma and any other states, when there is no electrical activity whatsoever. And I think Pim van Lommel has a great job in that. But in your cases, I think they just ignore it, right? Because they can't possibly explain how a blind man can see and perceive things. I would imagine they just either poo-poo it or ignore altogether.
Yeah. And that's what was it Oppenheimer? That's what he said about Bohm. If we cannot refute him, we must ignore him. They ignore it, but then the evidence piles up, and the social craving for talking about these things builds up. And at some point, they cannot ignore it anymore because people want to know about it. People say it. Scientists like me and others come out of the closet, and then, well, they need to take it seriously, but they can't. They're trapped. Poor guys. It's like they're trapped. It's like you're trying to run some new Apple software in Windows 95. It constantly crashes. It's like Windows just crashed, and that's what happened. So, patience.
And why they're trapped?
Well,
why are they trapped? Because education or previous framework papers and all PhDs and that type of thing?
Yeah.
Why are they trapped?
Maybe we can play psychoanalyzing them. I think it's many factors. It's education for sure, because that's, as I was telling you, when you're brought up in school and then as a scientist, you're told certain things and you're not told others, right? So that already biases you. But also within the frame of the world in the last 100 years. I mean, we got rid of God, so they say. We left this void, and then secularism came in, and since then we've been trying to. That's why science has become a very weird pseudo-religion sometimes, because it inherited, as if we were doing family constellations here. What's the grandparent? Well, it's dogma, it's a sense of the sacred, all the good and bad things of religion. Now we pretend it's not there, and it's the return of the repressed. And so we all think we're so objective, and so all these virtues, but then we're just enacting them through other means, and we don't realize. So it's also a question of that's what I was mentioning, the dynamics of humanity in a way, or Western culture. Like it's all framed within it, but now it seems it is changing. Now you were mentioning NDEs. We need the skeptics. I mean, come on, they've even appropriated the word, like the skeptics, or they say some other people are the believers, again, as if they didn't believe in anything. And well, we're all skeptics. We need these people and ourselves to question the data in NDEs. I get it. Like, it's not, look, when they invite me now, and they do to speak in conferences about near-death stuff, I also tell them, look, I'm not coming here as a scientist to tell you I have proof of the afterlife. That's maybe too much on the other. No, but it's difficult. It's difficult. I always feel I'm walking a tightrope between doubt and belief. I must continue to doubt, but a healthy doubt, and I have to believe. But how to titrate these two is difficult. And it also depends on the temperament everybody has, or the experiences. Like if you believe that, in some religion, and then you had a bad experience, then you're wounded, you're harmed by it. And so then you may just sign up for the skeptical movement, right? And so it also depends on your life history. Back to NDEs, I know, and I've spoken with Pim van Lommel and Bruce Grayson. I love their work, and Samparnia et al., but we're not quite yet, right? As you know, the last work of Samparnia, you get these resuscitations, that out of those who remember, and out of those who remember, those who want to tell it, and then of those who want to tell it, those who saw something, and out of those who saw something that's veridical, intersubjectively verifiable, like these hidden images at the ceiling and so on. And then the thing shrinks. And then on top of that, you would want that to happen while you have an EEG. But of course, the EEG doesn't mention the entire activity of the brain. So at the end, it's like the devil's in the details. I think we get a nice framework, but we need to be very fair as to whether we got the details right or not. And I think we don't have it most of the time. So let's not just say for sure we know, but let's continue to entertain that. Now, what would the materialists say? The materialists say, well, look, maybe a couple of neurons, maybe 3, they're still alive, and that's what creates. But you see, at some point that starts sounding absurd, because they've always said more computing, more activity equals more experience. And here you can systematically show it goes the other way around, like less activity, like the you know, the machine is broken, and yet it produces the most spectacular function ever. Come on. And so you need to play on all these levels of whether their theories are coherent, they're consistent, they're reasonable. Then the burden of proof starts shifting. They would not accept it. But it's like, well, it isn't you who are proposing the impossible thing now. You're saying 3 neurons just account for your NDE, which, by the way, is also transformative in your life. Well, we are right there at the trenches. I mean, the war metaphor is maybe not the best one. I would say we're trying to figure it out. This is fascinating. This is, if true, it's big news. It's perhaps the biggest news since science started, right? That the mind goes beyond the brain and back to it. This is the paradox that I'm also struggling with, not just beyond, and it's this kind of ghost. We must also explain how, look, like my friend, like the blind friend, let's say he can access this non-local realm of perception in space and time, but then his tongue needs to move, his arm needs to move to report it. This is the real deal. This is the hard problem. The hard problem is not, I mean, and I'm amazed, and sorry for my lack of humility here. I mean, I like the work of David Chalmers, but I'm amazed how much people revere what's just an ill-posed question of physicalists. It's like, how is it possible that great matter produces consciousness? Let's call it the hard problem. Well, that's why don't we call it the ill-posed question, not the hard problem. So the real hard problem is how this miracle happens when mind just becomes matter or interacts with matter. So we change the starting position. We say, we can say consciousness is fundamental. Now, we hear that mantra very often among our acolytes today, but we still have homework. Now the homework is to explain the stability of matter, the miracle, why evolution took so much effort to build a brain so that we can filter the mind and have a daily life, right? These are all new, fascinating questions that emerge if you swap the starting point.
I think what you're saying is that the famous quote of how the water of brain activity turn into the wine of consciousness has a faulty metaphysical and research assumptions, right? It assumes, it can never be answered that way, I think.
Yes, you see, philosophers should be paid to think about good questions, but when they, and again, with my kind of false humility here, when they pose such a bad question and then thousands of them are perplexed for decades, something's really weird. Maybe the question would be, here I have wine, how can I make water out of it? That perhaps makes some sense, right? It's the hard problem of water, not of wine. But, if that's too much for you to entertain, all right, just continue doing your thing, but let us do our thing. I think that's what we're asking for. Because, I'm happy, I have a happy life. I don't have people outside with torches that want to burn me or anything. But things can get nasty and in an invisible way. Like PhD students don't get grants to study these things. There's suppression. There's suppression of alternative ideologies, you would say. And so that's why we also have to fight a little bit and say, well, look, we all should have a place in this table to discuss what's going on.
Yeah, as you said, we tend to equate mind with the brain and other way around, right? So I'm curious about something because I'm interested in this, but I haven't found an answer. Maybe you have an idea. So everybody accepts that brain trauma impairs cognitive abilities, right? That's clear. That's a clear case. Makes sense. According to prevailing paradigm, the body is like a machine. So if you damage a machine, it stops working properly. But what about the cases where brain trauma produces savant abilities? How can we explain that, do you think?
Yeah, I agree.
I have a case. I also interviewed a medical doctor, and one of his patients had a trauma from the golf ball in his head, and all of a sudden he could remember all the details on the map and had some brilliant mathematical abilities, and he was absolutely an average person before that. So I can understand if you get hit by the golf ball that you can't remember things anymore. Okay, machine is broken. But what about the other way around?
Yes. And look, we're still spending a lot of money out of the. I'm using an image, a metaphor, as always, but we're spending a lot of money yet out of credit card, the credit card of what the Egyptians already knew. There's this famous papyrus. It's one of the first written documents that shows that if you hit your head, something may go wrong in your thinking or in your walking. This is a great discovery. It is fascinating. Yes, it says there is a relationship between what's going on in your brain and what's going on in your thought or in your movement. So neuroscience seems to be hung up on that over and over, like just with a credit card, just withdrawing more and more and more credit. But we must be more subtle than that. And again, William James wrote it more than 100 years ago, in his essay on immortality. And many other philosophers, Bergson is another one. So James put it for the general public. And that's how I explain it when I give outreach talks. I said, we have the productive option for the relationship between brain and mind. Brain, the verb is produces mind, but we have a permissive option, another P. So I say to everyone, the most important message for you here is to remember this double P, the PP. Remember the PP. This is the most important thing. We not only have one option, we have two, right? So the other option respects the data, respects the tight correlation, respects the fact that if I drink too much alcohol, I pass over, that if you hit me in the head, I faint, but it also includes the edges, right? So you first start, I would say, by opening a possibility. And so here you have like two branches where you can think this relationship. And then these branches branch themselves and you get different isms and different subtleties. Well, is it a filter really, or is it permitting, or is it receiving? You can be more specific about what's going on, but it's like a species. You're talking about, about tigers. You're not talking about, here whales. It's like a completely different creature of understanding. Okay, now these edges, I call them the edges of consciousness, as I said, because it's like there are many, but you need to explore and get to them. And separately, and by the way, this is another trick that our physicalist friends would use, which is they don't want to contemplate them together. They just say, okay, let's just talk about this case, and then they can dismiss it as whatever, coincidence, or we don't know. But if you bring cases of hydrocephalia, right? Like they do a brain scan on somebody who has a perfect normal life, and then discover it has this thin layer of ham, which is the cortex, and all the rest is water, like in his brain, right? Okay, but you put it there like a detective work. You just put this pin there, okay. But then you go for NDEs, as we were saying, near-death experiences, and you go and fish the most spectacular ones. The one where the lady just told the surgeon that she saw him doing that before, and she couldn't have known, right? That she does that when she was totally unconscious, right? So you put that pin there. You go to reincarnation cases. It's like if there was a map of the Lord of the Rings, this is maybe going towards the northeast, far the edges of what's been explored. But there are great explorers who've been there. You take the work of Ian Stevenson, and then you find that out of 1,000 cases, there are easily 20 or 30 which are incredible, which are impossible, right? Where the person remembers so many details as to 40 details. And again, they're invoking chance. It's too much. But then you can also go further and look for the physical marks on some of these reincarnation cases. Just put another pin there. You can go to precognitive dreams, bing, 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 bing. So then you have all these edges mapped. And now you go with all these edges and you say, remember, we have these two options, right? Like, you showed me all the orthodox neuroscience data, and we had agreed that both P's would explain the productive and the permissive. But now I bring this other data, and this other data doesn't fit in the productive scheme, in the productive landscape, in the productive meta-explanation, but it very naturally fits, all of it, in the permissive one, right? So that's why another way I use when I do outreach talks to make it visual, I say, we have the data are the pictures. We have pictures that sometimes are not rectangular like a normal picture when we used to print them. You see, some of the data has a shape, and then I go like this and I do it, I say, okay, some data are like this, but some data, and I do that, like some of the data we're capturing has this shape, or even it looks like this. This is the data we're looking at. So in what frame does that fit? Well, it doesn't fit in the physicalist frame. And then we bring more and more and more edges like that. And so we have to honor the data and look for a frame. And the third thing we need to do is to find a wall and a hook to post the frame so that people can see it. So again, you see number 3, data, conceptual understanding, and social outreach of this other possibility. So I'm always juggling between the 3 in this quest of a science of consciousness.
So just to summarize, what function does the brain have in your view? What's the closest? And if we take, you use 2 categories, but let's take 3 from Ian McGilchrist. Emission, brain produces all the phenomena, including consciousness. Transmission, it tunes in like a radio and receives a larger mind field. Or permission, what you mentioned, is a filter role, so allowing the right amount of a larger mind through. So which of the 3 would you say is the closest to truth in your view?
If there was a 4th option, all and none of the above. No.
Please do, by all means.
I used to like the transmission one, but it's true that if you speak of transmission as all metaphors, including the dashboard metaphor, all these metaphors break down at some point, right? Like if you use the transmission metaphor, and I sometimes use it, say, look, when this phone, if I would break it and it dies, all its memories, my emails are not lost. So that perhaps is useful to speak about where memories are stored. And that could lead us into another discussion, because asking where, it's asking for spatial place, and that's that capital scene for Bergson. It's like, come on, they're stored in time, anyways. And I may use the receiving metaphor, saying, well, the problem now with this brain is that it cannot receive the information. But then, of course, you need to explain, well, but we know it's somewhere in some server in the US, right? so then you need to explain, if you want to go further, where is it really and what's the receiving mechanism. So perhaps I like a bit better the permissive one. And Ian McGilchrist speaks, and others, right, about, for instance, when you produce a sound, right? When you produce a sound, you're producing it, but it's a beautiful interaction between air going through, right, certain cavities that have a form that allows the sound to manifest, right? So in that way, you can also try to imagine how thoughts would be formed. It's like you're giving shape to something. So the permissive metaphor allows for that. If you're not satisfied with this way of thinking, I also invoke the prism. The prism is quite beautiful. You have white light it hits the prism, it can reflect, it can refract, and when it refracts, it can branch, and you can see it's made of different colors. So you see, there are all these paradoxes which you can visualize with very everyday objects. It's like, where was red? Did the prism produce the red? Well, yes and no. We needed the prism for the red to be seen, but the red was already contained, you could say, in the white beam of light that hit the prism. So maybe that's my favorite one poetically or aesthetically, because it also respects the key role of the brain. Because all this insistence of beyond the brain, but our dogmatic skeptic friends, they're also right. But what about the brain? It sounds like an organ king. Yes, it's quite important in display. So the question then is how to make that more specific, right? And then you need to dive into the details of hybrid prehensions in Whitehead or Bernardo Kastrup, right? Analytic idealism. And also he uses the water metaphor, which would be another one. You can form these eddies. So you see, we're juggling with metaphors, but I'll go for your third option. Not so much transmission, production, come on, not so much transmission. It's more permission, I would say, that kind of, it's a paradox. It's like mind through matter can express itself, right? Isn't that beautiful? And by the way, it sounds like also we're talking theology here, which we often don't talk about, but it's like, what about God and nature, and God in nature, or God through nature, or nature in God? So it's a very similar business, I think, it's going on here. Like, why, if consciousness is fundamental, then why bother? Why bother evolving this physical universe and complexifying it to a point where brains could just argue bad-blooded on journals about certain theories being pseudoscience? I mean, what's this cosmic joke about it? It's beautiful. And also other organisms, of course, plants and fungi, and even a return to animism. We cannot go back in time, but it's like, well, if everything is alive, then everything is alive, right? So what about stones? And it's the greatest of all movies, like The Why of the Universe. And there are many things to be explained. Yeah, why a brain? Why this luxury? Why this beautiful investment in what we have in the skull, and yet at the service of the mind or of consciousness, not the master, more the emissary, to paraphrase Ian McGilchrist here again.
Do you think that the science of the future should embrace the sacred and transcendent?
Yes.
Again, because we had it in the past, we kind of took a distance from it for a while. Do you think we should somehow go back to that, but maybe on a different level? What's your view on it?
Yes, back to the future. Totally. And that's why I like the word research. We are researchers. We are searching again. They knew it. They all knew it. But now we can know it through the context of our times. This also gives me peace, right? Because otherwise you say like, well, they knew it, we lost it, how stupid, and now we're struggling. Well, no, this needs to be re-expressed. We need to re-express this wisdom in the age of AI, in the age of transhumanism, in the age of dying secularism, in the age of, grumpy physicalism. It's like the task of our times to re-express that wisdom. And yes, very quickly, you realize, at least I realize, that's why I have imposter syndrome, right? Because you presented me as a physicist, which I am. I can show you my degree, but I'm not really a physicist. In fact, I'm trying to renew my physics license recently because people ask me about, well, what about electromagnetism? And then I say, well, I learned this 20 years ago. But it's like, well, maybe I didn't think carefully about magnets, right? And the same with a neuroscientist, imposter syndrome there. And then you realize, we're talking about everything. We're talking about science. We're talking about the arts. We're talking about mystical experiences. We're talking about the sacred. And we need to use the words appropriate to the time. So we say the sacred, or we say spirituality. We don't say religion because people are fed up with them. I get it. I went to a Catholic school. I know all about it. I mean, I don't regret it, but I get why people are, especially in Spain, for instance, you cannot invoke religion for God's sake, right? But you can say in mindfulness, you can say, no, I do mindfulness. Tuesdays and Thursdays from 6 to 8. It's like, are you praying? No praying. I'm just doing mindfulness. Okay, so if that's what they need to hear, we call it mindfulness. But what's always lurking is the sense of the sacred. Like it's the question of life, the universe, and everything. It's like what the humanities should be studying, but they aren't, because they look at the sciences, the hard sciences, as this causing to imitate. And it's like we are all betraying each other, right? Like the physicists are not doing their work. They present themselves as philosophers. The philosophers want to be logicians and mathematicians, and they just lost it. The humanity guys, they want to show statistics and data, and they stop thinking with their heart. It's like, please, can we just reconstellate everyone, and then we're all in the same boat.
I was wondering myself, for people who are considering doing research in parapsychology, what would be a good theoretical framework to help us understand this type of phenomena? And somewhere I heard you suggested a 3M model, metaphors, models, and metaphysics. Do you still think it's a good theoretical framework for people to pick up on, or at least to start with?
Yeah. I use that. I try to use kind of catchy.
It works.
Well, catchy names, or also break. Let me have a footnote here before I try to answer your question, which is I also play with language deliberately, because language is used to show stuff, but also to hide stuff, right? So when I speak to everyone, I say, pay attention to all these prefixes, right? Pseudo science, super natural, anti this, and so on. Also pay a lot of attention to the adverbs, scientifically true, but you can also say historically true, or juridically true, or experientially true. So I say, let's be careful with the adverbs here, with the verbs as well. Like X plays a role in Y is the mantra of all PhD theses in neurobiology. Oh my God. It's like, what does that mean? It's just a huge filler verb, which you say this has to do with that, right? So there's kind of danger in the prefixes, in the adverbs, in the verbs, right? Now, because you say parapsychology, it's another one. Like parapsychology, like, oh, no. Okay. I would zoom out before we go into models, metaphors, mathematics, and all the other M's. I would say what's needed, as I heard this say from Eric Weinstein, I think, what's needed is fuck you money. This is an expression I didn't know existed. This is really what's needed. Yeah, sorry, you're just coping with my with my imperfect words, but no, it needs to stick. What's needed is fuck you money. So please, billionaires around who know a lot about how the world works and want to help us contribute, we need your fuck you money, because look, last year, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago, look, I'm not writing Orthodox grants anymore. It's very alienating just to tell how great you are. It's very alienating to lie about what you want to do so that you get your money, and then you don't get it. So I wrote one about consciousness and so on to my beloved Spanish ministry, which, by the way, pays my salary. So I'm very grateful, right, to the taxpayers in Spain. And the reply was like, really? Like, you really want to study that? So there's really not a lot of hope in normal funding venues. So what the young ones need, if you ask me, they need to be brave and believe in what they do, right? And in a way, just want to do it. But they also need like a fertile ground. They need institutions, but I don't know what's going on with institutions. That's why we have Essentia Foundation. That's why we have the Paris Center. That's why we have the Scientific and Medical Network. That's why, there's the IONS and other places that serve this kind of third role. It's not a hobby, but it's not a business, right? So that's what it's needed, like these kind of institutions that put out the word, that give us a true sense of community, and then funding so that we can offer these young hearts, as I call them, like a decent path forward, that it doesn't need to be all misery or all I have a job and then at 11 p.m. I write my essay on cosmic consciousness in a blog that nobody will read, right? So we had this meeting recently at the Paris Center, and we, for the first time, could bring, and we could have fellowships to bring people under 30. Because when I started there, I realized the average age was 75. You see, it's like, great, you're all welcome. But it's like post-middle age crisis, retired spiritual people who used to be physicalists. That's the demographics. But, you know, I have an 8-year-old. My older daughter is 8-year-old. My younger one is 4. So between 8 and my age, which is 43, I have no idea what's going in the world. But we need those guys, you know, we need those people. So I think really what we need is to put in place a fertile ground where they can do PhDs, or where they can just employ their skills and their passion to do that, not as a side job. Now, having said that, then we can go in, double click, and then speak not only about the sociology and the politics of it, but about the epistemology. We need to offer different isms, and this is already happening. You know, now people know that the two alternative forced choice between clever physicalism or you dumb dualist, it's a false choice. Now they know there are more options. That's already great. Now they also hear, and that's also why sometimes they invite me. Oh, what a curious creature, a physicist, neuroscientist who had a near-death experience and doesn't mind talking about extrasensory perception. So they need to see people, respectable people, or at least respected, that speak this out, and so they feel more normal about wanting to study those phenomena. So it's like we're building a city. We're building a city. You know, we need places to sleep, places to eat, places to think, places to walk around. We're building it. I feel we're building it. Yet it's really hard to get any of these in main journals, right? And well, I don't know if we need to make more effort to convince the editors, but the editors are also coming out of the closet. I sometimes speak to them and they're curious. They want to know more about it. There was a recent editorial in Cortex, a paper by Friedman et al. It was basically a paper showing, and of course we would need 4 hours to unfold it, but showing that upon stimulation of certain brain areas, it seems that people could bias a random event sequence. So, you know, what is that? Psychokinesis, and how the brain, how you may just turn off certain brain filters to activate that capacity. Well, that paper was published in Cortex, and then the editors published an editorial entitled "Why We Publish Things We Don't Believe In," or something like that. Well, that's what we need. We need people say, I don't get this, it's crazy shit, but you have the right to say it if you play by the scientific rules, right? Summary, I think we need community. We need a community, communication, communion, and keep on doing it. I sound like a politician. It's like, now vote for me on the 7th of June.
I'll do it. But if we go back to metaphysics a little bit, in your experience, and you thought through, you had your personal experiences as well, which metaphysical model do you think is the closest to the nature of reality, taking into account the totality of phenomena, what you showed, the core science, but also all these so-called fringe phenomena on the edges, as you call them, or parapsychological?
Like a politician, I won't answer your question, but I'll do my best. Why? I have a reason. I don't think we need to choose. You're asking me what's the best. And I could say analytic idealism. It just makes it for me. And look, it's great. And I must admit, I need to study it further because it's not just reading a couple of books and watching half a dozen YouTube lectures. Sure, I'm more interested in the pluralism. So we've come from years in the desert of this kind of monotheism, this monoculture. We could only grow and eat physicalism, right? For 100 years at least. Like, come on. And now what I celebrate is there's pluralism from this, from this dogmatism. We have a pluralism. We don't need to decide yet. I don't think it's the right moment to make a contest or even to rank the alternatives. I know everyone who expounds them believe that theirs is the best. And that's great. Continue doing it. I'm just so happy that the idealism landscape now has been made respectable by Bernardo, right? That's something I would say. Thank you. We needed that. Now, am I going to tattoo myself long life analytic idealism? Not yet. For instance, I'm more a Whiteheadian. But it's fine if other people. So Whitehead is really hard to get, but it resonates more with my, whatever it is, my temperament, my karmic journey. So the business of the mental and the physical poles, right? The prehensions that we were talking about, all of that feels and sounds quite reasonable to me. And also maybe if I would locate these isms in another territory, we would have physicalism, just they're there, matter. Idealism, it's like its perfect arch nemesis. It's just at the other side saying mind. I'm not so sure that idealism pays the tribute to matter that matter deserves, but we would just leave it there. But now in between these two strong poles, there is dualism, which can be made respectable. And David Ray Griffin, for instance, often speaks, well, he passed away, but he used to write a lot about how to make these interactions. And as long as you don't consider them substances, you can still speak about mind and matter in a dualistic way. Then we also have, so that will be here, dualism, materialism, idealism. Down here, we have dual aspect monism. Another one, Harald Admanspracher has been working hard, again, to make that known, understood, and respectable. And this links to Jung. Of course, I often ask Jungians, what's Jung's ism? Is it dual aspect monism? And Jung is a little bit of everything too. Jung is also an idealist sometimes. So anyways, this idea of the two aspects. But you see, if idealism, I think, maybe suffers from the dashboard metaphor, because I believe we have direct contact with reality. And not only believe it, I experience it. But anyways, and maybe I need to be corrected there, of course. Dual aspect monism, I think, has some problems, for instance, when we die. So when we die, what happens with the dual aspect? Like there's one part that now doesn't have a place, right? So dual aspect monism, I believe, also needs to work on, smoothing its edges. Then we have pan-experientialism in the middle. So you see, we have kind of a cross: materialism, idealism, dualism, not in the substance way, dual aspect monism, and then panpsychism. But I don't want to call it panpsychism. And I, again, appreciate the work of Philip Goff, right? Thank you for standing on the stage while all these grumpy people throw at you tomatoes and tell you you're stupid because rugs are conscious. It's like, well, he's not saying that. The problem with panpsychism, a la Goff, perhaps, is that I'm not willing to sign the contract that says that consciousness is a property of matter. No. This is covert physicalism. This is not a good deal. Right? So that's why I would put instead pan-experientialism a la Whitehead. So you see, there are a few, and then there are more isms. And recently, Robert Lawrence Kuhn published, it's about to come up, the final version, like this massive piece called A Landscape of Consciousness, right? Explanations and implications or theories. It has more than 200 theories. It's 142 double column paper. It is incredible. Okay, so now we have, the menu is huge. Now we have it on the table. the tree has many branches now, not just one stick, kind of the unsterile stick of physicalism. It has many branches now. Okay, now we need to prune them. Now we need to say maybe this whole branch can go based on this empirical work. So there's a lot to be done. And that's why I say I'm not going to answer your question. And I did. My favorite, but favorite doesn't mean anything. It's like strawberry or chocolate. The one that resonates with me historically, personally, experientially, and conceptually, I would say is Whitehead and Bergson. So, but let's put it this other way. I don't know in the Netherlands, but a problem in Spain with the left is that it fragments in 1,000 parties, you see? And look, I don't even vote. So don't just take this as, I don't even consider myself a left winger or a right winger. I'd rather be on the other axis, whatever that is. What I'm saying is, if we break free of physicalism and now we beat ourselves to death as to what this new version of ism, the new ism, is the dominant one, we will make the same mistake that the left always does, just fragmenting into many little bits that then cannot do the work. So I'll say, we'll figure it out. Let's rough each other's edges and let's celebrate this pluralism. Let's enjoy it for a few more years and then progressively prune it into maybe a new dominant view of the world. And I'm happy if we call it idealism. I'm happy. Perhaps we're healing a wound, Natalia. This is another way of saying it. We're healing the wound at the heart of science. We're healing the wound where we separated the objective from the subjective, right? The wound is there, and now if we can just at some point look at the scar and smile, I think that's beautiful. And I have a big one here from my surgery, and every day I see it in the mirror. So it's like these worlds were apart, and now we're bringing them together. Whatever we want to call it, that's fine. The ism is fine. And for everyday people, that's just how it's immediate experience. That's how they perceive the world to be. And then there are other, by the way, more things to say here. There are other isms, because here we could be talking about the metaphysical ism, but then what about, and this is something I've been recently thinking about, this is really work in progress. What about literalism? It seems to be, when we speak about reality, the nature of reality, that things are either literal or fiction, right? It's like when we say, did that really happen? Like I was reading the preface or the intro of John Mack's book recently on abduction phenomena, right? The kind of thing they pay me to do. And in it, he explains this conversation we had with Thomas Kuhn, was a friend of his. And Mack was saying, I have this phenomena in front of me. Where do I place them, right? In what ism do I place him? And Thomas Kuhn, which perhaps he wouldn't dare to say so that publicly, told him, and then John Mack tells us that Kuhn said, well, if only we could suspend these meta boxes of happen, didn't happen, real, not real, So even the distinction between fact and fiction, I think requires a third space, like a synapse, right? Like a synapse where the imaginary, like the imagination has a proper role that doesn't need to be collapsed again into this other two alternative fourth choice between, is it really a fact? Did it really happen? Or is it just made up? So even at that higher level, I think we have a lot of work to do with all these isms. So there are many wounds. There are the wound of mechanicism, the wound of reductionism, of physicalism, of secularism, and also of literalism and of nominalism and so on and so forth. I'll stop.
But you're doing research, of course, in this parapsychological, whatever we call it, field, right? Extrasensory experiences field. What is the key principle, metaphysical principle, that informs and underpins it? So if I take reductionist materialism, it says that everything ultimately reduces to matter, right? Yeah. That's the principle. What is the key principle that underpins your research and metaphysically speaking, and your research questions ultimately? Because
would non-locality work for you? It's non-locality, but I don't need to borrow all the money from quantum physics. I'm not saying these are macroscopic quantum phenomena. I'm just saying I'm studying perception. Let's be concrete. Like the three things I'm studying: extrasensory perception through extraocular vision, as I described. The other one is not the ability to perceive anomalous information, but to actually exert an influence in the world. That's sometimes called, psychokinesis, which is a word that sounds like coming from the Ghostbusters. It's like, ooh, but it's like, it's the idea that not only can you receive beyond the senses, but you can also act, because if mind and matter are just like these temporary scaffolds we put to talk about things. Well, what about in specific here affecting a random event sequence, a sequence of zeros and ones, and there I have, for instance, the luxury to work with the Global Consciousness Project for the HeartMath Institute, and also with another group. It's called the Oregano Group. So these are just teams that are using really good technology. I have it here. I could show it to you, like these random event generators, last generation, like a physical system whose properties are really fine and well known, and see if memory or perception, attention, intention can have an influence there. So you see, this is also based on the idea of non-locality, the idea that my mind can influence a physical system. Right? How, we don't know, but it's like what we already know for 100 years, just taking it seriously at the microscopic level. We know the world is non-local. I think we know that. We don't want to think about it. And the third aspect is survival research, right? So look, if extrasensory perception is possible, and if psychokinesis is possible, now, where Alex is embodied with long hair, when I die, well, maybe some of that stuff still goes on, right? So that's why, for instance, I'm working with a team where we study terminal lucidity, which is like towards the end of one's life, again, where you would think that if the brain is really damaged, you wouldn't expect it to work at its best, and yet people have these peaks of lucidity, cognitive, and even physical. That's kind of research I'm doing at the kind of what's called survival research, right? So these three legs. I would say the metaphysical principle there would be non-locality, and also drawing from traditional wisdom. Like the theosophists know a lot about that. They have their own maps. I'm invited to all sorts of groups now, even the spiritualists of Allan Kardec. And I say, should I go or shouldn't? And I go, and they have their own way of talking about it. And sometimes they sound maybe like a religion, but they're good people. And I'm just using all the materials I can. Like if you're in the middle of the forest, and I'm just using, branches from here, stones from there, to kind of build up the research. Bergson, if you read Bergson, you don't get any of that so articulated and so explicitly. But back to Bergson, if you read Matter and Memory, he speaks about perception as virtual action. I mean, it all makes a lot of sense. It's like we can rethink even our own bodies. I sometimes, not very often, have these mini mystical / philosophical experiences where if you just contemplate on what's going on when you're looking at your own hand, it's like it is your own body, like you're seeing what's technically part of you, and then you have these moments of insight that perhaps don't require even an ism label behind it. It's just fascinating. It's awe. That's where the sacred comes in. The moment where you don't even need to put it a label. You're just feeling it very deeply, and you're in total awe. It's like you surrender. It's like you're in reverence to just being here, experiencing this. And that's why the future scientist, and I think the future and the past philosopher, was a yogi, and will be a yogi, a poet, a mystic. It will be this union of exteriority and interiority. Maybe we don't even need to write books anymore about stuff. We just We just be it. Look, like the Buddha or the Christ. We will just be that.
But I think I might disagree with you. Bergson alludes to that, actually, to non-locality, because he gives an example of a wasp, finding its victim, that he demonstrates that all living beings have this ability of perceive or mirror the other being in their psyche. So the wasp does not have a perception, it's just it mirrors the victim, so to speak, in its own psyche. And we, as part of the evolution, we all have that. So he alludes to that a little bit. So
totally,
I might add to your...
Totally, thank you. Yes. To me, Bergson feels like you open one of his books and it's an uncontinuous, unbroken insight that rather than lasting a sentence or a paragraph, it lasts 273 pages. And he brings that light to every topic, right? So when he writes about time and free will, his PhD thesis, one of them he wrote too, well, it's about freedom, right? And numbers and quality and quantity. When he writes about matter and memory, it's neuroscience, perception, memory. He brings this new life into that understanding. When he wrote creative evolution, it's the same for biology. The two sources of morality and religion is about, yes, the different ways of being in the world. So this, when your remark helps me also remark that we don't necessarily need to go for the craziest phenomena, like bending a spoon right after you died in a haunted house. No, the entire field of our experience is constantly enchanted with that. We just need to rediscover it. And so this is what I appreciate about these philosophers. They just make everything come to life right here, right now. Everything. I'm a father. I mean, I do the dishes. I put them to sleep. If my science doesn't help me to be more present there, as also Bergson said, if a philosophy that doesn't include trees, it's not a philosophy worthwhile. So we're talking about being human. Being human. If this wasn't an easy problem, that's what we're talking about.
That's a very easy problem. But when I was preparing for this interview and I was listening to some of your talks and looked at your articles, I was wondering, why would a PhD in theoretical physics like yourself would do consciousness research in neuroscience? What led you there?
Yeah. I think I've been pulled from the future. I'm not joking, but I say it in a way that will make you laugh. It's a strategy, Natalia, really. I've been doing all these things. There's a good friend of mine who's a very well-known neuroscientist, like a strong one. And he said, Alex, stop doing this. Like, you're tackling all these topics. And if he said it, he put it poetically, something like, you have all these dots in the sky, but there's no clear line that joins them. As you're saying, you're going to fuck it up if you continue like that. And I didn't know what to reply. But then I realized, wait, it is a constellation. So I've been doing these things, but I didn't really know why. Like, for instance, English, I do a lot of English talking and writing, and I think I can do it pretty well. I studied a lot of English when I was 15, 16. Like, my mother tongue is Catalan and Spanish, right? Why did I study so much English? Well, I just did it. Physics. Well, I did physics because I had to choose between physics and medicine. My grandma wanted me to do medicine, but I thought I could not, and I would not like to remember all those names. So I had this great physics teacher who at high school would just come and talk to me for hours. So that's why I did physics. When I finished physics, I would have continued, but then I had to look for a job in the same city where I was, because my partner, now my wife, was finishing her PhD. So we had the two-body problem. So again, it was kind of a random, serendipitous, synchronistic decision, maybe, to say, okay, I'll stay. And so there was the job for a neuroscience lab and for a developmental biology lab. And I applied to both, knowing nothing about both fields. Like, I couldn't care. And then one never replied and the other did. So I became a neuroscientist. So then for 4 years, I'm studying Drosophila olfaction, right? And playing with optogenetics and building virtual reality systems and closed loop tracking and activating, making flies smell light. Fascinating. And then it's like, well, but I'm not going to be doing this forever. Like, the prospects of just studying Drosophila for 60 years, I mean, it's not for me. So then I started studying other organisms, and I went to Lisbon, and the PI there, who's amazing, Rui Costa, said, Alex, come and do whatever you want. And so I did. And there I meet also artists, and I was in this residency for 9 months with dancers and pianists, and we would talk about movement and behavior. And I studied worms and how mice learn. And then I said, well, I'm not going to study these creatures forever either, because the promise is that in neuroscience, if you study the brain, you'll understand something about the human mind. That's the unspoken promise. That's what attracts the students. So when I was recruited here in Spain 8 years ago, I did what everybody advises against. Don't change topics again, man. You know the literature, you know the people, you've published something. It's like you set your bank account to zero, right? Because all this credit you lose now, all this debit. So I started studying human cognition and behavior. But I always read philosophy. When I studied physics 25 years ago, I went to the philosophy faculty and took lessons there on Aristotle and Lucretius and all the rest. I also went to India in between, and there I met, the work of Sri Aurobindo, and I experienced for the first time what this kind of supermind may feel like in a physical room. So I had my mystical kind of experiences there, and I met this philosopher who introduced me to Bergson, Heidegger, Whitehead, Deleuze, and all the rest. So you see, it's kind of this river with all these waters being mixed. Then, and I'll finish my quick bio now soon, then I had my near-death experience, and then I felt I was given like a ticket for 40 more years of life. I had it right when I was about to become 40 years old. I had just got tenure the year before. So I felt, how ironic would it be that I finally get tenure and then I die? You see, it's like, no. And so I decided I'll just do whatever I want to the degree that my physical and societal and family constraints allow me, right? And so then I started meeting this invisible college that's very visible, like all these people that have been doing it forever, right? Like Rupert Sheldrake and Dean Radin and so on, learning from them. And then I came into the radar of the Paris Center. I ended up being director there. So this has happened really quickly, the last 3 years. And so now I look back, now you can understand me better. It's like, I was doing all of that, and now it all makes sense. It's like, I have a grasp on physics. I've swum the waters of neuroscience, but I've also had mystical experiences. And I'm also an intellectual activist. I wasn't looking for that either, right? I like being in this cave. That's what I like, being here, reading, writing, and analyzing data. So it all makes sense, and there's more to come. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
I totally understand it. I have completed a PhD in social sciences, but I haven't stayed in academia. I haven't defended it. And I thought, why have I done it? I mean, nice, but not really useful. I mean, I'm not teaching anything. And what I'm doing now, it's so incredibly useful now. It's like a basis that I have for what I do now. Now I understand. So I'm totally with you. So I'm calling myself from the future there. But
yes.
I was wondering if NDE experience itself for you, was it transformative? Apart from giving you courage of, okay, I almost died, so now I will do whatever I want, because that's, life is short. I felt it, right? And I should do something with the rest of it. What else was it for you as experience itself?
Yeah. It wasn't a Hollywood kind of NDE, right? It's like a second grade kind of NDE.
B-movie.
Yeah, because I wasn't in heaven and I wasn't like in total bliss. It was a blessing. So I saw the light at the end of the tunnel. It wasn't a tunnel; it was a well. I later heard from Bruce Grayson that it's more common that people see it vertically in a well in the east, and it's more common that people see a horizontal tunnel in the west. I don't know what that says. Maybe my love of rice and that betray that I've reincarnated from someone in the East. Anyways, and there were these three figures waiting for me. I know who they are. I don't say who they are. They weren't family members. And I kind of telepathically told them, I'd rather not to, as a British would say, I'd rather not to. And I came back. And that's it. And I was back in my room. And when I came back from whatever that was, we used to say it's a dream, but whatever. I wasn't kind of transformed. I was still, quite struggling there. And then a few days later, I had surgery and it took me many months to recover and so on. But the way I explain what happened to me is as if I had, and why do we say as if I had? Let's just say I crossed the threshold. And because I was there, I was sprinkled. I call this kind of a golden dust. It's like, imagine you enter into a kitchen where somebody's cooking something amazing. And when you get back to another room, you still smell like that, right? So that's what I felt, that there had been this kind of subtle golden blessing on me just because of having spent a few whatever. I don't think there's a clock that can measure how long. And that accelerated what was already ongoing. So it just crank it up, meeting people, getting intuitions, doing things in an easier way, like an accelerator, like some sort of divine oil in the wheels or in the motor, despite the mechanical analogy, I'm sorry. So that's what it did. I also had another dream before that with fantastic animals, huge animals, hybrids, like an elephant with the head of a giraffe and a bear with the head of a lion, and they had fire in their heads, and they were bending. As I'm telling you this, I feel it here. They were bending their heads with fire and putting it on my head. That's clearly a kind of a
Jungian dream almost.
Yes,
Jungian type dream.
Totally. So from these 2 data points, perhaps it was pretty clear that something was going to happen then. But I'm kind of the same I was before. I have the same vices and virtues, just more aware of everything and
more intuitive, maybe.
More intuitive, a sense of acceleration, a sense of I'm in it. I already know it. It's like things were happening, but now I can see. It's like this thing pulling me from the future. I can see it. So I don't look so naive, I smile to it and say, yes, let's go for it.
Interesting. I want my question about your background. I was wondering, because often you mentioned that philosophers try to prove everything mathematically these days, and so forth, psychologists as well, just to give a bit more credibility to the type of research that they do, right? That's because we say math is a ground, it's really solid thing, physics as well. So does physics background help you with your research or with your credibility, socially, politically, and so forth?
Yes.
Fortunately, is it a good combination?
Fortunately and unfortunately, that's where the imposter syndrome comes. Because I have less interesting things to tell than some average lay people. This is a word I don't like, lay people. But they invited me because I have a PhD in physics and I'm a neuroscientist. And I entertain people and I think I say interesting things, but they really invited me for the credibility. Like, science is the religion of our times. I'm sorry. I often tell people when I'm with lay people, I ask them, well, I'm telling you all that you already know and you know more. Why do you need me here? Why do you need the expert to tell you things that you already know, but it's only after hearing them from the expert that you can now allow yourself to take them more seriously, right? But I've also learned, being conscious of what this whole play is, that it's what we need to do. If they need that, I'll go and I'll say it. So I'll tell them, the expert says, don't trust the expert. And right? But I'm telling them both things seriously. Don't trust the expert means trust yourself. But at the same time, if you need me to speak about quantum stuff as if I understood it, or if you, right? I'll do it. I'll do my best. I'm also figuring things out, right? And also another thing I've realized, we all, as in a play again, a real play, we all have different characters and roles. As you can see, I'm a bit funnier and a bit rougher than other people. But I also appreciate that other people are, I could have just done this with my with my hair and wear glasses. And also
it's good too.
No, I mean metaphorically, visually, I could have appeared more polished, you see, and don't say so many kind of strange things. And I speak to people that I smell they're also into the same thing, great academics. And I tell them privately, let me use this analogy here again. I'm not gay, but I can imagine 30 years ago, right? If you were gay and you wanted to find the others, you would approach other people with this kind of antenna, kind of trying to signal that you're different in that sense, and trying to not betray very much what you want to say, but at the same time be very receptive to see if the other, and then the moment the other person gets in, you get it, it's like, okay, now we can talk. So I do this with academics, but not with respect to my sexual preferences. I do it with respect to my metaphysical preferences, right? And more often now, it's quite cool, because at some point it's like we both get it. I speak louder, perhaps. I just signal it more. Then we both get it, and then we can have another conversation, right? So it is very interesting that we need to, and the masks help for that, right? So so the masks help for the lay people and also for the academics to help them both come out of their closets if they want in a safe manner, so that it's more of us out there, and so we can work together on this with greater force.
I always ask this tricky question to my interviewees. What is consciousness to you? And why does it seem so difficult for us to agree on a definition?
Yeah. And I always say, when I am asked about definition, I say, I'll define consciousness if you define the word define. And it's no, I do it.
Now we are into semantics, I think.
Well.
Use of language. I could open a dictionary, Wikipedia. What does it mean define?
Well, and I could just throw at you this pun and say, yes, we are into semantics, whatever that means.
Okay. What do we mean by consciousness, right? Why can't we agree? Why can't we agree?
Yeah, but look, what do we mean by matter? What do we mean by number? Do mathematicians agree on what a number is? Do physicists agree? Do biologists agree on what life is? Do we know what life is? Right? So what about love? What about you? So we need to know what we're talking about, because a lot is just talking past each other. But those who are very picky with definitions, that's why I say, well, you first define, and then I'll define consciousness. Now, having said that, well, consciousness, what is consciousness? Consciousness is ... everything they told us matter is not. That could be a good starting point. Everything they told you the universe is really at the fundamental level. Everything they told you matter just shines with. That's what consciousness is not, or the other way around. Consciousness has all of that we had to strip from matter in order to make science as a business work, but we don't need it anymore. So that would be a first definition. A second one would be, what is consciousness? It is subjective experience. But we could even get rid of subjective, because what else? Is there objective experience? So you could say consciousness is experience. You could say consciousness is immediate experience, to emphasize with the adjective that the way we talk about experience is often as if it was mediated by something else. There's always a middleman. There's always a middleman. Well, no. That comes first. But we could say more. And if you go to the East and observe their super sophisticated, you could say, psychological schemes and experiences, consciousness it's not even my experience. It's kind of this lattice, is this is what reality is made of. And then maybe we want to differentiate between mind and consciousness. And they speak about consciousness, about existence, about bliss, about purusha, about prakriti. So you see, we use a definition, but whatever definition we use, we will very soon need to upgrade it or downgrade it, because it leads you there. You can start talking about consciousness as experience, and I think this is a good starting point given the 400-year delay we have in modern science. But very soon you realize, well, if it's my experience and then there's your experience, but then maybe we're talking about kind of this whatever collective unconscious, for instance, which maybe is not a good term, if I may say so, but what it's trying to tell us is that there's not your and my experience, and then we can speak about experience with capital E. And then if we're bringing the fungi and the stones and the sun and the galaxies, then it's not immediate experience as we psychologize this for us humans. So then we need to think beyond us as humans, right? And what about angels? And what about, elementals and other entities? And so we need to be ready to readjust like the sails of a boat, what we're putting in and out to navigate this journey, right? But yeah, consciousness is experience. It's experience is, and I also like these. Who was Rupert Spira? Like when his way of speaking about consciousness is also interesting. It's like, how does he put it? It's like that in which and from it which, it's like, it's very Zen-like. So this is another way of thinking or even feeling about experience. All of that is experience. Yeah. So experience is perhaps the meeting point of this division between objective and subjective. It's what will unite them both. It's the Christ in the sense of the third element. The excluded middle will be included again. And that would be experience because I want to honor my experience, but also the existence of whatever that is. And I don't know what the penny is as a physical system. It's quite mysterious to me too. So the objective and the subjective meet there. I could ramble, I could ramble forever about that. What do you think experience is?
You're asking me, what do I think experience is?
Consciousness, experience.
To me, it's more linked to the how, which is awareness, being aware of something. But that's more of a mechanics how it is, right? Than the consciousness itself or experience itself. But for me, I would say consciousness is more. I'm more in the corner of a larger mind, and we're smaller minds in the sense that I like the metaphor of the large ocean being the field of consciousness, the fundamental layer of reality. And then the waves on the oceans are us having consciousness, having its own experience. That's a model which sort of, I'm like, wow, beautiful. That kind of resonates. But can we test it? I mean, can we scientifically prove it? I don't know. I don't think so.
I like the ocean metaphor too. And you see, consciousness also means different things depending on your language. We overlook that. As a side note, as I was telling you, my mother tongue is Catalan and Spanish. When I was in Lisbon, I learned Portuguese. Now I'm learning a little bit of Italian because I go to Tuscany so often. And you realize that for instance, the famous consciousness is what it is like to be, like, okay, at least it's a meeting point definition, right? Nagel's one, a lot of people like it. Well, this is really hard to translate in Spanish. You feel you're kind of forcing the phrasing. So then you wonder, maybe we shouldn't be so logocentric. And I don't want to sound like the French man in that respect. You see the French philosophers, but maybe we shouldn't bet it all on the language definition of what it is, because we realize that in different countries, nations, traditions have different operating systems. For instance, I can express certain ideas much better in English, and others I can explain much better in Spanish when I talk to my Argentinian or Mexican friends about consciousness. And if you only speak one language, you don't have that affordance, you don't have that experience, you don't know what it is like to be able to say something and realize that the context is constitutive, like the very language you're saying it. So, and that should remind us that, well, maybe consciousness also lets itself express through other vehicles like music. And that sounds cliche, but it's not. What is a mantra? You know, when I went to India and they would read me Savitri from Sri Aurobindo, is that a poem I'm listening to? No. This is the direct transmission of consciousness force. And you may say, what is that? Define it. Or I should say, come to India with me and experience it, right? So you're getting it from the vibration of the sound, right? For the dancer I work with, it was movement, right? Don't tell her all this blah, 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 blah. She wants to move. For my kids, what is it? Right? It's playing. It's, you know, it's being there. So we're too hooked up sometimes on words. I mean, I'm saying this with all these books here, right? What about art? What about an image, a proper piece of art that just immediately tells you that, right? It's like ESP. It's not mediated. So let's even widen the definition, the meta definition, like the boxes in which we're willing to put these, that they don't even need to be word boxes. It could be a mathematical equation, it could be a mantra, it could be a dance, it could be tantric, you know, it could be making love, you know, it could be like the moment of ecstasy. It could be a mystical ecstasy when you read the lives of the saints, right? It could be that. It could be a UFO encounter, a true encounter. It could be all of that.
You know, I can relate to music because I play piano, but why for me consciousness is awareness is that the funny thing is that if I try to play myself, control my fingers and all, it doesn't work. I can't play. I can only play if I listen. So I listen the way I want to hear it, and I let the body do the work. So it's like two of me, you know. There is somebody who is being aware of what's going on and hearing the music, which I want to hear that way, the forte there, piano there, and let go. The moment I'm back into my body and trying to control, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. I mean, I know now. I know why, because the speed of the fingers and the eye to the time it gets, you know, from eye seeing and finger moving into the brain, it's too long in order to play fast pieces, especially. I know why, but that's why. So for me, awareness is that tool, the key for consciousness. But back to science, what are the biggest barriers to studying consciousness in your experience, and what needs to change? Because you mentioned some of it. It's just to wrap it up a little bit. Is it a scientific method that we are lacking? So how do we bring first person in an environment where a third person approach, objective approach is predominant? Is it maybe more we lack empirical data, but you are saying it's improving there? Maybe we lack a good theory, or maybe prevailing a more social, political, economical issues, or maybe something else. What are the key barriers for you, and what needs to change?
All of the above. Yeah, all of the above. Like, no, true. Maybe the most important one, I think the most delicate, I think the most challenging to me, I sense that thing we call the scientific method, which when proper philosophers and sociologists of science have investigated it, they've realized that maybe there's not such a thing as the scientific method. And here I would invoke Paul Feyerabend, for instance, the infant terrible, right? Or Bruno Latour, who passed away not so long ago. I think we need to understand what's that alchemical process that's happening when data are turned into facts in laboratories. We need to understand what's going on there when you have technology, tradition, protocols, instrumentation, and then a paper is published, and then that has become a scientific fact. That's one thing. I think the greatest impediment I feel is that, I'll put it in this way, and it sounds metaphorical, but it's very literal at the same time. Before, and I have folders everywhere. Before I had I felt like the themes, the topics I were studying were topics. That was my PhD was in stochastic thermodynamics, so it's like whatever, heat production in a molecular motor, like whatever, like the folder. I would study it, finish, then. But now I don't tackle. I not only do I tackle these topics, they tackle me back. This is a weird feeling because I feel what I'm studying, it's not this kind of inert thing without agency. And so I suspect, and this will sound cryptic, but I suspect that the science will be transformed. What we call the scientific method will need to evolve into something different if we really want to study these phenomena. Because they are not like, again, like objects you bring in a lab and you can forever repeat whatever you want them to do. Again, I know it sounds cryptic, but I don't want to get into that too much. Maybe it's a subject for another conversation. But I sense there are entities at play. This sounds horrible. It sounds like you're talking about ghosts. No, but if we're studying consciousness, right? Do we really think we will be able to just do what Francis Bacon told us, like just chain it in our labs and interrogate her through all her corners, as she said, and make her spit her secrets? It's not going to work that way. Maybe it's more, she will make us spit ours. So there's something about that going on. In the meantime, so that people don't freak out or they're not scared, other barriers, and you spoke about first and third person, of course, the understanding that objectivity is intersubjective consensus. So that's quite something we need to bear in mind. I was going to say we need more theories. Maybe we don't need so many theories. We need all these physicalist, functionalist theories to just turn down the volume and let others speak. It's like in this group where it's always like the two very same people always speaking loud. It's like, can you shut up now? We need to listen to the rest of the group. So we need more of that. Technology is always there. There'll be more. It will be better. Maybe use it for a more spiritual purpose rather than to just alienate people with some sort of transhumanist theology. What else do we need? Oh, you say first and third person. I think we need fourth person too. The we. A fourth person approach. Community. I'm saying this because I felt so alone for so long. We need community. So we need a fourth person approach. We need a fifth person approach. What do we do with you guys? And a sixth with them, all these opposing forces. Maybe we need a 0th person approach, like the new book by Metzinger, isn't it? About the core aspect of experience. It doesn't even look like first person. We need all of that. We need more experience, I think, because we cannot be talking about all of that if we don't feel it in our flesh. And I'm guilty about that. The first one, like my wife always says, stop reading all these books and can you just sit down and meditate or try to have some sort of, deep dream or I think we need that too. Otherwise, at some point, it sounds dry. It sounds fake. It sounds we're juggling with concepts, but there has to be skin in the game. That's another thing. It's an adventure. We don't know what's going to happen. It's not a profession. This is maybe where science can also change. It's not a job to study consciousness. It's not like you're in a bakery. And all respect to those who make bread, right? It's not a job. It's the cosmic destiny of humanity, what we're talking about. And so science needs to be at the service of that. not the master of that, not the custodian of that, not the entity that decides. Last week, I invited this 84-year-old woman to this meeting at the Paris Center. She saw the Virgin Mary 80 times from when she was 6 to when she was 17. It was a sensation in Italy. In my opinion, this was the best lecture of the entire meeting. And she was talking from the heart, it's like that was as authentic, as real as it got. Sure, then we can say, what would Whitehead say about the prehensions that were involved in? But I think we need more consciousness for real. And that's how we entitled the event. We need consciousness for real. That can be very academic, sure. And we need all these brain scans ready to go. But we need to take it for real, very seriously. Like this just encompasses everything, encompasses what the artists are always doing, whether they know it or not, what children do, what elders know. Yeah. Well, so that's a long list.
We also kind of brushed on this, but I still want to have your kind of the most important points you want to bring here for young generation, for people who are studying now, for people who will go into science or will become scholars or even philosophers. What the most important piece of advice would you give them from your extended experience?
I would say the most important piece of advice we can give them is to ask them for advice. Again, turn it the other way around. I'm sorry if I sound slippery, because I know you're doing a good job. You're trying to pin me down, say something concrete, stop flying in the clouds with all these beautiful metaphors that maybe mean no, I'm not saying you say that. But sometimes, I speak for 2 hours and then I read the comments and I shouldn't. And somebody says, this young man has been talking for 2 hours and said nothing. So look, we had these young people. I'm talking about last week. It just happened. It's very present. And something very beautiful happened. I asked them, can we have lunch together? I want to ask you what you care about, what you fear, what you need, rather than giving them an advice. Like, you're the ones, just keep on trying, all that kind of sometimes elderly bullshit. Because I have daughters, I know how I sound when I'm in this mode. And they look at me like, poor daddy, right? So I asked him, I said, we need you. We need you, not you need us. We need you, and we need you to tell us what you need, right? So we had this lunch, and I was taking notes. They said all sorts of things. And then two young women came from that group and said, Alex, this is the first time somebody in charge of anything asks us what we need and really wants to listen. So I felt how paradoxical what they need is in a way that we're willing to listen to what they need. And the moment they feel that, that's what they need, you see? And then I could tell you the long list of things they said. They said more sponsorship. They said, just we cannot afford some of these things, right? So yes, financial help, encouragement. They said to be included, not performatively, but in those spaces where decisions are made, right? That's what they said they need. I think they need to see that other people are doing it and can do it. Example, right? They need to see that this can be done by others, that this has been done by others. So they need to see us there, just walking the talk, which is sometimes hard. And they also need elders. And I don't know where the elders are. Elders doesn't mean old people. Our civilization is, as you may have noticed, collapsing, and that includes that the elders are not to be found. And despite all that, if we are Whiteheadian, let's say, creativity is the ultimate principle. So they will find a way. Life will find a way. So it's through them that I told them and told the people in the room. I started bluntly. I said, I have two problems. The first one I already told you, between 8 and 43. I don't know what's going on. It's like total blind spot. And the second one, I looked at everyone else and I said, in 20, 30 years, you'll all be dead. They didn't like to hear that. But think about it. Most of us, let's include the two of us. I don't know how old you are. I won't ask. In 40 years, my wife wants me to live longer, but in 40 years, let's say 50, we'll be dead, right? So...
Is that why you say that the death is the biggest elephant in the room?
Oh, yes. Yes, that's a super big elephant in the room, maybe the big elephant in the room, because we feel we're mortal, but we do everything we can to never talk about that, never entertain it. In Spain, there was this TV program in the 90s. We had this dictatorship for many decades. And then the program was called Let's Talk About Sex, right? It was a success. Let's talk about it. So there's the Eros and Thanatos. These are the two elephants in the room, and these forces. And I wonder, look, let me say another thing. This may sound polemic, and you can cut it out, or you can cut out when I say you can cut it out, or you cannot cut out anything. Daniel Dennett recently passed away. Right. All right. Thousands of people everywhere saying how wonderful. I never really quite understood or appreciated what he wrote. I must say, it's my inability. But anyways, I wondered if he's such a wise man, like the wise man of the secular, atheist, materialist West. I wondered with true compassion, really, I'm not trying to be sarcastic here, when he was dying, when he knew he was going, as he was transitioning, as he was passing away, did all those books made a difference or not? Right? If philosophy is preparation for death, I think we're not doing a good job, right? And then the corollary question would be, his book was called I've Been Thinking. Well, I wonder, what is he thinking now? If anything, that's another thing, right? So, yeah.
But what's the moral? What's the moral then?
What's the moral?
What we do doesn't matter?
No, the moral is consciousness for real. I mean, death is part of life, but and also we think we live our own lives. Okay, this sounds like self-help section here, but I have no books to sell, so I'm free. That may be one of the reasons I say myself, I don't have a book to promote or a metaphysical ism to promote. So it's like I travel light, no conflict of interests. That sounds like self-help here, but we say we live our lives. No, life lives us. I mean, we're instruments for that thing to happen, and we spend hours kind of replying emails and articulating logical thoughts and just weighing the evidence and being angry about people disagreeing. And what are we doing that for? What's the goal? What's the ultimate goal of all of that we're doing, right? And then the horizon is part of the horizon is death. And so that doesn't mean we need to be obsessed with it or just carpe diem. Like these are stupid. I think these are stupid solutions. It's not about that. It's more like embodying our own humanity. We're mortal, but I think we're animals and we're also divine beings, and we're mortal, but I also believe a part of us is immortal. So that's what we should be talking about. Make those elephants sometimes present. Say, can we let's thank the speaker again. Can we let the elephant speak now? And it's a bit scary because it's for real. It is for real, right? Like if idealism is correct, I want to know what it tells about my life and me as an individual, whether I'll totally dissolve or not, about what happens when I'm dead, what happened to my ancestors, are they still here? Why did I have kids? What will they do? What's the future of humanity? What is this planet all about? These are all the things I want to know, not just what neural correlate of, seeing red. I mean, forget about that. That's the game we need to play as academics, but who cares about that? That's irrelevant, right? It's the big questions that are very, look, let me tell you another concrete thing. I always do the dishes, as I said. I'm a bit traumatized by that. so I would always kind of do the dishes and sometimes think, fuck, again, I'm just wasting all this time. Just if I could only read so much as I'm doing the dishes, like, and I have a dishwasher, but it still takes time. And then I almost died. And then when I came back, the first time I did the dishes again, I just
what a privilege. What a privilege, right?
Yeah, I just felt like I can be enlightened doing the dishes, right? So I want this hint of awareness to just permeate my entire life. In a way, I want to become a saint, not in the religious way. I don't want the Vatican to just, that's what I want. And that's what we all want. So maybe that's too much to ask for YouTube or philosophy or universities. But anyways, that's what I think it's at hand.
Interesting. The thing is, what I find fascinating that for some people, and I think it depends on your metaphysics and your experiences, for some people with materialistic kind of tendencies, right? For them, death, and which means after that comes nothing, right? So our life is that very short span that you have to buy, to go, to experience, to, who cares what happens with the planet? Okay, well, better not, but ultimately you don't care because you won't be there in whatever, 40, 50, 60, whatever years, right? So for some people, death is a pressure cooker to buy more, to get out of life as much as possible, that sort of thing, sometimes at the expense of planets, of the others. But for others, experiencing death, and I think maybe it's related to metaphysics and your philosophy and your experience of that, like in your case, right? People wake up and all of a sudden, death was a big wake-up call to experience washing dishes as the most delicious activity in life. Where is the difference? The philosophy? Where's the difference? Why death for one means this, and for others it means completely something else?
Yeah, Natalia.
The big elephant. One pink and the other one gray.
This disclaimer here. I'll sound like priest Gomez Marin now.
Yeah, do it, please.
Well, it's great. It's grace. Grace is another elephant in the room we don't talk about. Grace. What do you mean by grace? It's also willed. It's like the will will do it. We'll figure it out. We'll study. We'll make business meetings. We'll just make better YouTube videos. Like the will. There's also dissent for free. There's grace. So I think, I believe, I feel, I know these verbs. Sometimes we need to be careful. But if we speak about the filter, remember of course you remember the filter, right? How can the filter let more mind or more light? How can the prism let more light and colors in? Well, either you, and these are two options, but every time you're presented with a two alternative for choice, you just go like this. 3, no, let's have a third one. Yeah. But let's make these two possibilities. One is by erosion. You are so disciplined that you work on your filter for decades. You just do yoga. You just go to a monastery. You have this monk-like life, and you just work on it. But another option is when the filter just rips off suddenly, which is a burden, because it means you have it's trauma. It's literally trauma. That's what it is. You'll have a big hit. But it's also a burden, and it's also a blessing, because the moment that the whole thing rips off, you get that. And then if you're lucky and you heal, then you've had it. And to me, that's a kind of grace, right? So that's why all these spiritual awakenings now told through the mouths of scientists or academics, they seem to have more currency, because it's like, well, they're certainly not stupid. I mean, that could be debatable. And they're certainly not mad. So if that happened to them, now we can listen, as we were saying before, right? People want to listen, but it's because the filter broke. They had an accident, they had an awakening, something happened to them. They didn't make something happen. Something happened to them. That's what I mean by grace in this sense. So if you're that lucky, now you can, in a way, to share your experience, your example. At the same time, I will be careful with the distinction between us and them that we often do. Because maybe sometimes it's a bit unfair. Like, Terence McKenna would say, those who dies with more toys win, as what materialism is. But I'm not completely sure that materialism in terms of, living a superficial life based on what you can buy, and physicalism, let's say. I mean, there are maybe cousins, but I also know a few materialists who are beautiful people, and also perhaps what happened is that they live in a kind of a bifurcated mind. They're just good at being physicalists in the lab, and then on the weekends, or from 6 to 11 p.m. on weekdays, they're into it, right? So let's not make too sharp of a division. Otherwise, we sound religious. We sound like we, the ones who know, them poor guys, they still need to see the light. We believe we've been touched by the light. We feel it, but maybe they have too. And at the same time, let me also say, and this is another confession, when I came out of the closet, metaphorically, and started knowing all this community of people, they let's say all those who would just click on a survey, consciousness is fundamental. Well, we still have a long way to work, right? Because sometimes I'm surprised, why are we having this petty, egoistic struggle, even when doing a project about consciousness as fundamental? You see what I mean? So we're not so enlightened at the end of the day. We are quite limited human beings. So ultimately, I would not make a distinction between us and them, but I think that we can be struck by consciousness in this way, and this can feel like help to do the work, because it opens you up, it accelerates things. Everybody wants that. This is the compassion part. I've realized everybody's human. Some people don't look like, but everybody wants that. Everybody wants that, and they're doing their best. Even if they think the mind is nothing but the brain, they're good human beings, longing for love, and yeah, that's the universal glue, the glue on.
I'm with you there, so I wouldn't say anything anymore. But there is one more topic which I couldn't pass, because you mentioned it. I was so intrigued. You mentioned it during the online conference of Essentia Foundation, and you basically said that concerning memories, the right question is not where or how they are stored in the brain, but whether they are stored there at all. So where are the memories stored?
Yeah. Where memory is stored is the same kind of question as how does consciousness emerge from the brain? It's like being in the presence of a slightly evil journalist whose question, if you answer them, there's no way back. What do I mean by that? If you accept the premise of the question, then all your effort in answering it, I believe, will end in failure. Because where are memories, where is pointing to some space, and maybe at the end we can redefine what we mean by space, and then the memories can find a home there. But I mean, it sounds like I'm going to invoke Bergson as I would invoke kind of a doctor of the Holy Church here, But Bergson intuition is, well, Bergson has these cones and these contractions that are happening, but the key is they are not in space, or maybe they are not in space as we usually conceive of. And why? Well, this is complicated. It's because memory, as he says, when you hear kind of a bell or a clock, it's not something you can specialize. It builds on top. It's like a melody. Another metaphor would be it's more like a snowball effect. And so it always grows, and that's why nature is creative, and that's why it's constantly evolving and bifurcating and doing different, as Deleuze would say. So I'm not making much sense, but I'm just saying, to non-scientists, case is not closed. You know, when they say we know consciousness is produced by the brain, well, if they say we know memories are stored in the brain, you're selling me metaphysics and you pretend it's data. That's not what, that's not the unique interpretation of it. So when it comes to this, and by the way, they're also experiments. I mean, if reincarnation is going on, right? Yeah, let me say something more empirical about it. If reincarnation is going on, and you remember how your surname in your previous life, how your wife was like, what you like to eat, or what you did, where are these memories stored, right? Not in your brain, because you didn't have one. You just came into a womb and just, right? More things like the work of Mike Levin, for instance, at Tufts University. Maybe he wouldn't want to go that far, but he's shown it's not in the genes. At last. He had to come and just show it. We knew it, but he had to show it, of course, because the secret of life is in the genes. Well, no, this planaria, you can cut their heads and they regenerate them, and they do all sort of crazy things. They grow two heads and they remember it, and it's not in the genes or in their brains. Right? So where are those memories? Well, maybe he'll say in the electromagnetic field. Well, that's kind of the progressive way to liquefy this idea, right? Until we can make it etheric, if you wish, right? So they're in the electromagnetic field, it seems. So you can go and study proper neuroscience and see that this is not the entire picture. You can go and study developmental biology, like Michael Levin does. Rupert Sheldrake has also done experiments that have to do with what he calls morphic resonance, but it's so hard because people don't want to do it because he's presented as an outcast, but he's been saying it for more than 40 years, right? Like there's this again, I use the word mechanism, I shouldn't say that, but there's this process by which what is similar summons what is similar, and that could be the mechanism. Again, I said mechanism, shit. All right. So there are all these edges of memory, perhaps. There are all these edges of memory, and then if you want to go more new agey, the Akashic records and regressions, but even the collective unconscious, right? If you can tap into that, and you can tap into, your ancestors. I don't know if I've done family constellations. I don't know what's going on, but how can it be that the person who's called to be that member all of a sudden knows or behaves as if, right? So we could do a similar talk for the edges of memory. And even if we end up discovering that they are somehow in the brain, because I said we need to go beyond the brain, but also back to it, I think at least if the question is where memory is stored, the answer should transform our understanding of space and place. So if you don't want to give on that, I think we would learn that the other, Bernard Carr speaks about other dimensions, right? And brains, BRANES. This is another way of thinking about it. More a la theoretical physics, you invoke other dimensions. Maybe memories are there.
But if memories are not in our brains, then why can't we just remember the future? Because from physics point of view, it's just past or future is just one timeline, and it doesn't rule it out.
Oh, yes.
Or we say premonitions and that sort of thing. Yeah. Remote viewing is a way of remembering the future. What
another easy question. Yes. Thank you. Well, then there's another one. Yeah. So how symmetric are we willing to conceive going back or going forward? And here people differ, right? Like people I respect, differ, right? Bergson hardly ever speaks about the future. For him, it's totally creative. But Whitehead speaks about the mental pole, which, as I understand, it's where it's like the future pulls and also can leak into the present. That's where you need to bring in experiments, right? Like these experiments I was describing you of like remote viewing something that hasn't been chosen yet are very puzzling. But that's why also the stories from people who have precognitive dreams are so fascinating, right? Like, what does that mean? I think what it means, and I'll say it vaguely here, that we think everything is actual, everything is actualized. But no, one of the messages from Bohm and from quantum mechanics writ large, if you want to understand it in this way, is that there are two orders. That's so cool, because people speak about theories of everything, which are theories of everything else, because really what we really care about, it's never in those theories of everything, like, love and anger and fear and pain. But anyways, it's not theories of everything. It's a new order. What is that? We have the actual, what has already happened. It has concretized. The wave function has collapsed, whatever, right? And then this goes into objective immortality, if you wish to use Whitehead's terms. Like for Bergson, it's more poetic. Is nothing is lost. Nothing lasts, but nothing is lost. So memories will always be there. Now, for the future, well, what does that mean if people can anticipate? I think there's this space of possibilities, virtual. Things can exist. Maybe a slightly metaphysical way of putting it that would fit in a t-shirt is things can exist in actuality, but also in virtuality. And so the future is virtual, like kind of this, like this path integral interpretation, like there are all these possible paths. Maybe some are more likely than others. So I think that's why you can jump ahead and kind of have a sense of what may happen, and then it needs to be actualized. And so
when
I think
you
that's
say
how
virtual, when you say virtual, you mean like a field of potentialities type of thing?
Okay. Yes, exactly. Taking potentiality for real again, not just as some sort of statistical prior that we count once many actualities have happened. Like it's a real mode, real realm of existence, the virtual. And I think it's in the virtual when non-locality happens very easily. When you can, it's like we were speaking about how to expand the Newtonian into the Einsteinian, right? And how there's no problem at the end. This is just a particular case. I think it's in this mode, in this order of reality where we can have all the crazy shit going on. We can have like, retrocausality. We can have true indeterminacy, we can have freedom, we can have a lot of things there. And then this has to go like through a funnel of the present and needs to be made actual. So one of the mistakes, and I think this is a mistake shared by most great theoretical physicists that are trying to push theories of everything. And what do I know? I don't have mine, but they have great ideas, but they all inhabit the flatland of the actual. But if they send some of those ideas to this new order of the virtual, then of course they need to explain how we go from floor 2 to floor 1. But this is my best guess, and you see, I don't know how good it is, as to entertain that the future can leak a little bit into the present without assuming this kind of blog universe where everything has already happened, and this means that whatever we experience now, it doesn't really matter, because there's like we don't play any role. We're just there watching a movie passively. But again, the data will help us. And David Ray Griffin, whom I mentioned, he edited Process and Reality from Whitehead, for instance. He was able in a book, it's called Postmodern Philosophy, Parapsychology, and whatever. He framed all these parapsychological phenomena in Whiteheadian terms. I think it's super interesting. But interestingly enough, he couldn't accept retrocausality, right? So we all have our thresholds for what we think is possible and not possible, depending on the theoretical tools we use. But once more, if the person draws the image and we haven't still chosen it, don't listen to the boring dogmatic skeptics, it's just chance. Come on. I mean, if you do it properly, I mean, whatever, you can think it's just chance, but if you do it well, I think there's pretty good evidence that the future leaks in the present, right? So we should not be moaning about it. We should be happy. It should be like big news. It should be on television, right? It should be like, you know what? This place is much stranger, as the famous phrase says, that we can imagine, not that we do conceive, but that we can imagine. I think that's what we've been talking about for the last 2.5 hours or more.
That's right. And Alex, where can people find out more about your work? Any books of yours or articles you want to recommend in particular?
Not really. And I should have a card, a book, and something else. But Google me, Google me. Yeah, it's not very professional to say that. But if you Google my name, depending on your algorithmic preferences, people still believe that Google is the same for everyone. That's amazing. No, just Google my name, and I have lots of online interviews, podcasts, conversations I have with other people, articles. So let's see what the universe will, the universe of Google will have for them. I have scientific papers, of course. I organize events. I have Zoom conversations. So depending on what you wish to find, you'll find me one way or another. Yeah, maybe I can send you the link to my website where I have compiled everything, and we can put it underneath whatever this is posted for people to just click there. That could be an option.
Alex, I do my research. I already have seen your website. But I personally can recommend the website of the Paris Center, where you are director, which offers various, not only on-site resources, but also online resources. And indeed, I particularly appreciated the conversations that you've had with various people. So I personally can recommend that.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for this interview. I enjoyed it enormously, and thank you for your patience. We really took almost 3 hours of your time, and I hope people will enjoy it too.
Thank you for your patience with my ramblings. I felt very comfortable sharing this with you. And again, congratulations. The work, I don't say it lightly. I mean, the work you're doing at the Essentia Foundation, it's one of the, I think this will sound superlative, but it's one of the ingredients that can save our civilization from collapse. The work you're doing there, the work we're doing, we don't need to be saviors of anything, but it's this beacon of light, and it's very well done. It's very professional. It's very rich in content, and I'll be happy to be part of it in whatever ways you need me to.
Thank you very much. It's our pleasure and our honor.